Friends, welcome. My name is Sam Heath, and this is In the Movement. This has been a webinar series that we've done for a few years where the goal is to look at people in the justice movement. And our hope here is to engage and elevate the work of people all across the country with ways and different forms of how they engage justice. So I work with Equal Justice USA, and we're a national nonprofit. We do work around death penalty repeal, restorative justice, and community safety. And what we're looking at today is addiction and recovery. What does that road look like? What does outreach around that look like? Keep in mind some things as we think about addiction, recovery, as we think about reentry of people coming back from jail and prison. This touches a lot of individuals. And a lot of us likely know someone who's been in jail or prison, who's engaged with addiction and recovery. It might be ourselves, but this is something that a lot of us have proximity to. And over the past few years, thankfully, this has been something more and more publicly engaged. And so we have with us today Jeff Walker, who's here from Wilkes Recovery Revolution. And so I'll let Jeff introduce himself. Jeff, if you can just say a couple words of who you are, and then we'll dive into things. But I'm thankful that you're here with us today.
Awesome, Sam. Thank you very much. As Sam said, my name is Jeff Walker. I am a director of programs at a grassroots nonprofit here in Wilkes County, North Carolina, very rural community. I am an individual in recovery. I'm also a formerly incarcerated person, so I spent most of my life, most of my adult life, in and out of jails and prisons up until about 10 years ago. I've been in recovery for 10 years, and I've been out of prison for 8. 2 of my recovery years come from behind the wall. Grateful to be here, Sam.
I am really glad. I'm going to share the screen a second. I had somebody say they were expecting you to wear the hat that you had in this photo and sport what I thought was hair, but I can't tell if it's part of your shirt. It's a great photo.
Yeah, no, it's hair. I still got the hair, man, and I love the hat.
Well, you got a couple compliments on it. So next time. Well, Jeff, I'm thankful you're here. And we were just talking a second ago. My hope is to kind of walk through things of how did you get into this work? There's a lot of unique work that you've done in Wilkes County that I know because there were unique considerations of that space, both its population and its geography. And then there are a host of programs that Wilkes Recovery Revolution has of how you are serving individuals there. And this could take up hours because there's so much that you all are doing. We've talked and engaged several times, and I've heard you kind of roll through this. There's so much that's there. So, I mean, as we think about this, first, I think let's start here so we get everybody on the same page. How do you talk about addiction and what it is? Because I know you've been in that work a while, and there's debate and discussion about what that is. Is this something that's primarily emotional or physiological? How do you talk about addiction when you're out and doing your work in the world?
Well, I think it's important to know here in a minute, you'll hear about a lot of the programs, but I think it's important to know that the very first program, which was transitional housing, we was told would never happen in Wilkes County, in the rural county. This was back in 2016, where people here didn't talk about addiction. They didn't talk about it to their family members. They didn't talk about it if their kids was in addiction. Nobody talked about it. And so myself coming out of prison and started really trying to support people in there the best of my ability, that was going through some things, whether they was using substances in prisons or just having a bad day. I found value in just trying to be a service to people the best of my ability. And so when I came out of prison, I wanted to continue to join that. And so I think it's important how we speak to community, because obviously we know there's a lot of stigma still with addiction. The one thing I had to learn the hard way is what I always tell people. I had to learn to call people in and quit calling them out. We got to call people inwards to us to have adult conversations and use good language, right? Make sure we're using good recovery language and good language in general. I spent many years in rooms calling people out because I'm very passionate about this work. And the things I was saying were true, but I wasn't saying them the right way. And so I had to be intentional on how I had to talk to community and people of power, your county commissioners, your chief of polices, everyone, you know what I mean? And learning how to call people in instead of calling them out, that was through experience.
Well, and it's still direct, right? You still might be confronting someone, but there's a way of doing it, to your point, that lets them know that you want to walk with them and work with them. I was in a space just a couple days ago, and we were talking about some of this very thing about language and what does person first language look like around addiction and recovery, and that someone we can talk about that they're struggling with addiction or are in recovery rather than they are a drug addict and defining them by that thing. It sounds small, but that shift, not only does it change how those out in the world think about addiction and recovery, it helps shift that person's identity about who they are. And that's a big thing, right? And
Absolutely.
when you're in this journey.
Absolutely.
So I want to remind anybody who's listening or watching, feel free to put in the Q&A feature at the bottom, any questions that you might have. You can click the Q&A button at the bottom or the three dots where it says more, and you can put in questions. We'll save some time at the end to answer those. You can put those in as we go, and we'll come back in the last little bit. And we're also recording. So anything that we share, you'll get a recording of it because you registered. Any link or website that we mention, or that if we put it in the chat, I'll make sure to send that to you as well. So you can just really sit back and listen. Okay, Jeff, you said something, and I don't know if I knew this. Your journey into recovery, I think you said, began 2 years before you were released while you were in prison. So go back to that, and then how did that flow into release and life after?
Absolutely. If for those that may not know, like you can find pretty much what substance you want and behind the wall in prison. And my first couple times went to prison, I was what you call ripping and running in there, getting in trouble, going to the hole. I really didn't do much of a change. This last bit I had, the last 2 years of it, I had a person to impact my life quite a bit. That he was doing life without the possibility of parole, and as I started getting to know him, I found peace. He had a peace about him that is hard to understand because he wasn't never getting out of prison, but he had this peace about him. And so, in there we went to some meetings, of course, NA and AA meetings. I attended some church services and some things like that. But I was just doing anything to better myself. And a lot of my addiction, like a lot of people's, come from past trauma in their life. And I wasn't aware of that. I didn't really aware of my insecurities and a lot of things that I've been struggling with my whole life. And grief was one of them, right? Like I've lost my mother, I've lost my sister, I lost my father. I've lost a lot of people I truly love unconditionally in my life. And I didn't really know how to process that because I was always using. And so, in prison, I did simple things. I wrote my dead mother a letter. I wrote my dead father a letter. I did things like that when I first asked to do it, I thought was ridiculous. But man, it was a relief. You know what I mean? And that's how some of that change process and me learning how to understand grief and loss and things like that started for me.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, that's a lot. I'm thinking a lot about you saying just grief being one, almost a barrier to engaging life, but also it's something you have to allow yourself to feel and to work through and to go through those processes to live life. And like you're saying, addiction blocks that or gets in the way of that. And it always blows my mind the many ways that trauma can function. And how, like you said, no one really talked through and said, hey, a lot of this behavior that we can see is rooted in something, which doesn't excuse it, but it really helps explain it. And that trauma piece is massive.
Yes. Understanding your trauma, I think, is one of the most important things to healing. Like you have to understand that this is why you are the way you are, why you behave the way you behaved, or whatever that looks like. And truly, for 25 years, I just really didn't understand that childhood trauma. I
Hmm.
started using at a very young age, but learning to process that and feeling it, even though it hurt, I was a grown man. You don't cry in prison. I was bawling like a
Mm.
baby. Um, and to go through those emotions and understand emotions, understand that, yeah, it hurts, but you can move past that hurt. And,
Hmm.
now I use a lot of my struggles as strengths that
Hmm.
I went through. Like it made me stronger and more understanding to where I can be better for the people we serve.
Mm. I hear you saying, I mean, part of moving past it is through it. Like you really have to revisit it. You really have to process it. And I'm thinking about this in my context of parenting with my kids. Sometimes I say to others about parenting, my job is not to help them just get over an emotion, but to help them through it. We can't manage or regulate an emotion that we don't allow ourselves to feel. And that's true of other things. We can't move past or recover from trauma that we don't allow ourselves to engage or feel. So that's, yeah. I also have at EJUSA a colleague who defines trauma really well and kind of upended how I thought about it over the last several years. Because I always thought of trauma as this list of certain things that would happen, but he talks about the three E's of trauma, and he talks about trauma being an event, an experience, and an effect. Right? You and I might go through the same event. We might be in a car wreck together, and you walk away and you're fine. I walk away and I have PTSD because we had a different experience with it, which had a different effect on us. So, to a degree, trauma can be really subjective. Someone may be incredibly resilient with something, and someone else may not be. And it takes a lot of work to really dig into that and see what that's doing to us. And a lot of people don't know how to do it. And again, I hear you saying, kind of, no one told me, no one walked me through that.
Absolutely. I think, what I like to say is I'm not an expert at many things, Sam, but I'm an expert of my own experience.
Hmm.
And I believe other people are too. We talk about lived experience, and which has to do with substance use and mental health, but your experience as you grow through life and go on your journey is key, and it's important. And you have to recognize the event, right? I moved through life for a long time, and different events took place and different things happened, and I experienced them, but I wasn't dealing with them. And
Mm-hmm.
and finally, when I did, learn to deal with the experiences I had, and process that, um, I grew. All that stuff made me grow as the person I am today, and I still grow every day.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
still experience things as a grown man, especially talking about with kids. Woo wee, you know, uh, being a father. Things like that. I wasn't a father for a long time in my life, and I've got three beautiful kids, and I have now been grateful enough to be their father for the past 8 years, but
Wow.
that's been one of the hardest things I've learned how to do.
Yeah, the best and the hardest. Yeah. I One thing I like about some of the language that I've heard you and others in this work use is talking about someone being in recovery. It's not that you are recovered and that that's done, that there's something applicable to anybody, whether they're in recovery or not, that this is a process. It's ongoing. There's always ways to grow. There's always things to learn. It's not just this moment that you reach. Because if it is, and there's a setback, I mean, you feel you've lost your identity and it's all over. But if it's this movement, this progressive piece, that's a little more heartening and encouraging.
Yes, absolutely. When I was in early recovery, and I tell people, I think I'll always be in early recovery because I'm always learning something
Mm,
each day. But I did when, my first year or two in recovery, like I thought that I would get to this place and I would have it all. I'd have life figured out. I'd have my recovery journey figured out. And obviously I found that not to be true.
hmm
I lived a lifestyle of crime and substances for a long time, and that was my lifestyle. That's the only lifestyle I knew. I knew how to survive. I didn't know how to live. And
mm,
so when I got in recovery, learning how to live, I had to make that my lifestyle. Yes, I work in recovery, but I had to do certain things for myself in recovery to continue this journey and to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you go from being in recovery, you're released, to starting to move into this work with Wilkes Recovery Revolution? Were you there at the beginning? Was this already going and you came in? What was that timeline?
So um, it was it's a transitional house. My plan in prison when I got out was homeless. I had nowhere to go, and this transitional house popped up here in Wilkes County. And I've been here my whole life. I didn't know nothing about it, but 30 days before I was released, I got accepted into the transitional house. When I got there on a Sunday, I was the second man in the house
Mm,
that had been accepted to it. So it was brand new. I knew nothing about transitional housing, recovery housing, sober living. I knew nothing about none of that. Ultimately, I was at a place in my life where I was willing to try new things because of the 2 years I had in recovery in prison. And so, of course, you had to do certain things. You had to go to meetings, 90 meetings in 90 days. You had to find work. You had to have curfews. You had a structured environment. You was drug screened, randomly, and it was all new to me. But it also put me. I had a lot of fear coming back to the community that I have terrorized for years, uh, of being around, old places, old people, and all that stuff. But it put me in a new community, in
Hmm.
a positive community, and that's where it started for me. As I said, I was already trying to support people the best of my ability while I was in prison, and I found a lot of value of just being of service. It made me feel good about me, and of course, helping someone is made me feel good. But I went there and I was a resident at that house for 6 months. Uh, One little men's house, it held 5 people. Um, and then situation happened with the male house manager there, and I was asked by the executive director to step into the house manager position, and then it's where I'm at now.
Okay. Okay. I I want to think about Wilkes County for a bit. I think I told you I grew up in Forsyth County in Winston-Salem and not too far from that area. So I'm in Charlottesville now in Virginia, and our city is about 60,000 people, 10 square miles. Wilkes County's 60,000 plus people, but it's 750 square miles. So it's the same number of people that I'm engaging here within this city, but geographically things are really different in that population. So why Wilkes County? Why was this started there? Where did that need come from?
Well, because Wilkes had nothing. We had, yeah, we had AA and NA, but really people didn't know about it. But if I could have been intercepted or diverted, then I might have gotten recovery a lot sooner if I'd had support.
Mm,
And so the executive director she started a women's house in 2015, and then that little men's house in 2016. And then I become a part of the organization. She had to go to Asheville. She went to Asheville. She left her kids. She went to Asheville for a year. And then, of course, Asheville has a thriving recovery community. And so she's seen some of that there. She wanted to try to implement this here. And because the need is here, you know what I mean? Like you said, it's 700, I think 34, 750 square miles. We're a huge county,
hmm hmm
very rural. So North Carolina, Wilkes County is in North Carolina. I just seen that in the chat, Sam. So
Yep. Yep.
yeah,
Thanks. Thanks for clarifying.
um,
So here's some language. I'll put this in the chat and I'll read it, just describing some of the work. But I've pulled most of this from the website. But Wilkes Recovery Revolution is a nonprofit organization committed to advocacy and community building for those who are in recovery from addiction. Over half of their staff, board, and volunteers have lived experience with recovery from substance use or mental health concerns. Why is that so important that over half the staff, board, and volunteers have that experience? What does that do to the work?
well, lived experience, right? Like, who better? I talked about being an expert of our experience. Who better to support people that are struggling with addiction than people who's been there? And so today we have 26 people on the team, and I'm happy to say that all 100% of our team, all 26 people, have lived experience. Some of them are peer support services, some of them are coordinators over different programs, but they all have lived experience. Our board is over 50% in recovery. That has to do with we are an accredited RCO. We are accredited recovery community organization. Our accreditor is Faces of Voices. They're national. And so that's one of the criteria. Of course, our policies and procedures and a lot of things like that have to align with,
Hmm.
person first, wraparound services and things like that. But that's one of their criteria is to be a RCO as well.
Okay. So what are other things that it means to be an RCO or recovery community organization? What goes along with that accreditation?
Peer led, peer run,
Okay.
right? And that says over half of your staff needs to
Okay.
be, inexperienced. We do our best to keep that at 100%.
Wow.
Your board, making sure that your policies and procedures align
Hmm.
with treating people how they're supposed to. Um, and then just, some paperwork and accreditation process.
Okay. Okay. I've heard you talk about, well, even just now you talked about community being a huge piece of this, that this journey was not individual, but it was something done with and alongside others. I've also heard you say something to the effect of that the opposite of addiction is connection, and connection is community. Can you talk about that? That's a truth, and that's a quotable thing.
Yes, yes. That's one of the things I always say at the end: is the opposite of addiction is connection. Connection is community, and community is where you find recovery. Um, you know, Building a community, a recovery community, like our mission is to create a community where recovery is possible, but restoring hope, repairing lives, and rebuilding community. We can't do the work we do without community. So, we found that we have to have buy-in.
Hmm.
And it took us several years to get buy-in and stakeholders, but having a community is, a recovery community, an ally community, a stakeholder community. That is the key to supporting people. If we can connect with our partners, hospitals, EMS, law enforcement, jails and prisons, and then we can meet the need of more people that they serve as well, which needs our services.
Hmm. What did it look like getting that credibility? And what were some of those early barriers in this rural place to essentially say, we need to have this and I need you on board? Why were some people struggling with that reality?
I'll take it. I can speak on a lot of different situations like that. One I'm dealing with currently, but I'll take it back to the beginning. Is the transitional house is located in downtown North Wilkesboro, which is a municipality, right? And so you have to get things zoned and get and that was challenging with their neighbors.
Mhm.
Of course, where the three houses are now, we have three houses of downtown North Wilkesboro, and we got five houses, but three of them are downtown North Wilkesboro. And the neighbors, we had to go to a town hall hearing. And we went to the first town hall hearing, and they had to cancel it because the fire code, we had too many people to show up against, not for us, against us. And so that was me, the executive director, and our board chair at this meeting. And so they rescheduled it, and they didn't want them people living beside them. They was worried about crime rates. They was worried about the property rate going down. Uh, all the things that we're stigmatized by. Uh, and we replied professionally with love and compassion, and kind of explained, I've never seen anybody in recovery breaking somebody's house, somebody sober, what I mean?
Mhm.
That these transitional houses is more structured and accountable than your neighbor living on the other side of the street. Right. And they didn't understand that we did get it passed by the skin of our teeth.
Mm.
Um, But now the lady, I always tell this story, the lady that stood up and I mean, let us have it at this meeting, was about a block away from the house. So in the past 4 years now, she buys every resident's Christmas presents for our transitional house. And she called us and she was so apologetic.
Mm.
And we did some things in the beginning and we still do them now, but it don't snow here a lot. But it snowed here one time, and I went and got the residents and said, bought some shovels, and I said, "Come on, let's go shovel their driveway." And so we went around to our neighbors and shoveled their driveway and asked them if they need anything, and just try to show them that we're human, right? We've made some mistakes, we made some bad choices, we're in recovery, but we are your neighbors.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Which I think is something that others aren't forced to think about a lot. I mean, I know not everybody in recovery was necessarily in jail or prison, but just one piece of data, 95% of people in jail or prison come back out. These individuals already are our neighbors and will be. And don't we want them to be healthy and whole in the same way that everybody else wants that as well? And sometimes it takes that confrontation to really humanize somebody. Okay. It sounds like that was the work of years, just overcoming some of this opposition as you all piece by piece built the work and the programs around Wilkes Recovery.
Yes. It was, the transitional house we had the transitional house program, which was 3 houses. We moved from the little men's house that when I become in the house management, um, I was asked by the board, can we make the men's house bigger if you had 2 houses? And I was like, of course. And so we moved from that little house and the 2 more men's house, where the 2 men's houses hold 22 people and the
Mm,
women's house holds 10 females separated. They're separated. Um, but it was that we had a thrift store, right?
mm,
We have a thrift store. We started a thrift store because I come out of prison with the clothes on my back, and that was the clothes that they give me. I had nothing. And so as I was managing these residents, there was a lot of people like me that was coming to us with nothing. And so we reached out community. And this was early on. And how the community responded at that time, it kind of built relationships too by doing things like this. And
mhm,
we reached out and asked for some clothes or things like that for people who's coming into our program, didn't have nothing. And before you know it, I had 3 garages full of stuff. And I said, well, let's just start a thrift store. And so we found a location and we started a thrift store. And we give out a lot of vouchers at that thrift store and try to help people make sure they have what they need. But the transitional house in a thrift store was from 2015 to 2019.
mhm,
That's the 2 programs we had. And then we kind of started blowing up in 2019. So it took that many years to build relationships and to destigmatize and advocacy and all the things we had to do in rooms that I got laughed at, right? I was laughed out of rooms. I was talked down to,
mm,
you know what I mean? But I kept showing up.
mhm,
I kept showing up and trying to speak out, speak up and speak well, the best of my ability.
mhm,
And we started building relationships, you know what I mean?
mhm, mhm,
I think in the beginning we went about it wrong. I think we started, well, maybe we didn't go about it wrong because it worked out, but we started building relationships with community before we did our county government.
mm.
So those 4 years we started building these relationships with county government, uh, both municipalities government, law enforcement, now the hospital, EMS, all the other programs we have.
Mm. I was going to ask about that. Talk a little more about what the advocacy looked like outside of Wilkes County. I mean, there was a little bit of travel there. Like there were other individuals you needed to talk to get support for this.
Absolutely. So we talked. We went to Raleigh. I went to Raleigh. This was for one of our newest programs, but we was able to get wrote in by our House representative uh, for our local district. Wrote us in last year for some money for the state budget. We met with him, presented this is for an inpatient treatment center that we're currently working on that project. Um, and of course the bill went through the House, passed with flying colors. It went to the Senate and got took off immediately.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm not a politician. I've never really politicked. But the only thing I knew to do is just try to be authentic. And so I went to Raleigh and started knocking on doors of senators and trying to explain to them what we was trying to do here in Wilkes County. It'd be the first ever inpatient treatment center in Wilkes County, and there's not, and the need is there.
Mm.
Uh, we've always served the underserved
Mm.
population, and so we're going to continue to do that. And the people who have private insurance as well. But there's not many. If you've got private insurance in North Carolina, I can get you in treatment in about 3 hours.
Wow.
If you've got Medicaid or uninsured, I can get you in a treatment about 3 to 5 weeks.
Mm.
And so ultimately, we need more for that population of people because unfortunately, during that 3 to 5 weeks, people are dying.
Mm. Are those who you all are serving people largely from Wilkes County? Are you taking individuals from outside the county?
Yes, we take, especially in our transitional house, right? Like we've got 12 unique programs, but our transitional houses, we take people from all over the state. Most of the time that is surrounding counties and of course Wilkes County we try to cater to, but we've got people from everywhere across the
Mhm.
state in our
Mhm.
transitional houses at different times.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna put in the chat and I'll send this to as an email to everybody so they can get it too. But there are a lot of programs that you have. You've mentioned some of them. You started with the houses, then you had the thrift store, and that helped create some buy-in in the community. And then piece by piece, you've added more. And I hear you saying now that you're working on this inpatient facility. So what are some of the other program? Maybe start with the, because this is one of the ones that most fascinated me. The what was it? The mobile food unit, or what was it? You had to get people food. This is a giant
Yeah,
county. So what did that one look like?
yeah, yeah. So you're talking about Wilkes Fresh Mobile Food Market, right? So we did some research in the community of the food deserts in our community, and it is operated by someone with lived experience as well. And so when we found these food deserts in our community, we started thinking, well, you know, everybody should be able to eat healthy, whether you're wealthy or not. And so this mobile market, it is a van. It's got a wrap on it, real colorful van that
Hmm.
goes into these food deserts. A lot of them are like Section 8 properties, and we sell fresh produce at a very discounted price. And as well, we take SNAP and EBT. And
Well,
it is, we subsidize a lot of that produce. We do buy off local farmers because we think that's important to buy off local small farmers as well. But that's where I'll jump into the next program real quick there, Sam. It's Fresh Start Farm.
hmm.
So we was like, well, we need the produce to put in this van. And so we created right behind our transitional houses that's located downtown. We put a farm. It's about 1.2 acre little farm. And so it is a work-based learning program too. Like, it is operated by people in recovery. People in recovery work at this farm for a living wage in
Mm.
Wilkes County, which is like 15 and a quarter right now in Wilkes. They are paid just as well. They are paid just like they get a paycheck and taxes taken out on anything. So it is a working program, but they don't have to work for the rent or anything like that. They get paid. Uh,
Okay.
we've got 4 bees. We got 4 beehives, and so not this year. That's pretty new. So next year we'll have our own recovery honey.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. And so it's fruits, vegetables, the bees.
eggs.
Okay.
Yeah, we have chickens too, so we got our own eggs. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I know there's also Wilkes Harm Reduction Collective. So, but first, talk about so people can hear what is harm reduction as a movement and strategy as a whole, and then what does that look like for you all in Wilkes?
You know, harm reduction is people can look at anything. It's anything to reduce harm. And so when we're talking about addiction and substance use and people who use drugs, of course, that's safe using supplies, clean syringes, of course, Narcan and naloxone, anything someone can use to be safe. We hand out condoms, right? We hand out bacteria, things to be able to prepare your substances clean. Uh, but harm reduction, and there's a lot of stigma with that. Whew,
Right.
a lot of
Right.
stigma with that. But we also take people's used syringes, right? And we take them, they bring them to us, and we send them off to sharps containers to be disposed properly. Um, but wearing a seatbelt is harm reduction, right?
Yeah. Yeah. As basic as
So
that.
that was, after getting started, that was the hardest program uh, to advocate for. And the reason we did is because we had started our recovery center, R3, and we realized that we was missing a very important population of humans.
Mm.
And that was people who use drugs, right? When I used drugs, I was underground, so to speak, with people who use drugs. And so we was not welcome in community most of the time. And we definitely had very little community to show us love.
Hmm.
So we opened that up in the middle of our recovery center. We opened up Wilkes Harm Reduction Collective in 2019, and we brought them individuals into a space of unconditional love. We showed them support, and we didn't push. We don't push nobody. If you're
Hmm.
there for clean syringes and clean supplies, come in. You're welcome. We take very little information. We do get demographics and things like that, but we don't, um, we give them a card that they can have their supplies. If they get pulled over by law enforcement, they can show them this card, and they're not supposed to get charged with paraphernalia. But it brought people in the door, you know what I mean? And without pushing people to their recovery, or into their journey, 1 out of 3 people has sought treatment that goes through our harm reduction program.
Wow. Wow. I mean, my question it was going to be, I'm sure you get this all the time with harm reduction. You said it was the program that's the most hard for people to come to terms with, but of how you justify that, because I'm sure people are like, well, aren't you perpetuating the issue? But I mean, you just talked about it gets people in the door, you're able to engage them. A lot of these individuals eventually pursue treatment. And if somebody's not there, if somebody's not alive, that they can't receive treatment. And so a lot of this is a gateway into really being able to serve their ultimate need.
Absolutely. And, sometimes when I'm was advocating and still to this day talking about harm reduction to people, it's because harm reduction, the key thing to advocacy is educating. You
Mm.
know what I mean? Like having them tough conversations,
Mm-hmm.
being prepared for somebody to have a lot of questions as well as is not buying in, right? Still to this day, I will educate someone on harm reduction or advocate for harm reduction, and people will look at me and say, "I'm not bought in.
Mm.
You're enabling." All right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but I would say 85% of the time when you have them conversations with them, they understand.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the one of the things that we did, sometimes you have to find champions to speak people's language.
Mm-hmm.
And so your sheriff has to sign off on a harm reduction program. And we advocated law enforcement and said, how many syringes do y'all find in the parks, or
Mm.
where do you find, I mean, I'm like, we will reduce that tremendously. And I said, people really want to have a place to bring their stuff without worrying about getting paraphernalia charges or charges. And they like that. And today you can go to any of our parks. So I'm not saying you won't never find one, but our parks and our things are clean because we send out hundreds of pounds of syringes every month.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you see the effect.
Yeah,
Well, talk a little bit, Jeff, about employment and what that looks like, both training and job training and partnership with employers, and how over the years that relationship has grown. Because I hear you've got the housing piece, there's counseling and recovery services, but the job is one of the other big branches here.
absolutely. With our local, we have we're fortunate enough in Wilkes County to have several manufacturing second chance employers.
Hmm.
Um, and not all of them was second chance in the beginning, but they are now. But people coming to our transitional house, one of the main things they have to do is get employed, right? And we say within the first 2 weeks. And when we first opened, that was challenging for
Hmm.
getting people employed in the first 2 weeks because employers didn't want to hire them people. And we was transparent, like, we got transportation. We provide transportation back and forth to work because we have no transportation in this rural community. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we have to do that. We've got vans running all day. And I kept seeing residents get turned down, some because of their record, some of them be honest, and was proud to say, "Hey, I'm up here at Phases, the name of the transition house Phases," and people wouldn't hire them. So I had to go meet with HR
Mm.
and talk and like, look, y'all need people. I've got people at this house. You know, 60% of people that's employed in manufacturers are on some substance anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, just like I did with the houses, I'm like, your other employees are using substances. These employees are not using substances, you know what I mean? And I said, they're drug tested, they're held accountable, they'll be at work every day. And before you know it, people start opening doors. I went and sit with every HR department manufacturing in this county. One of them is Tyson Chicken, which is, the biggest poultry in the country. That
Mm-hmm.
hires a lot of our individuals, but having them tough conversations and advocating. But from that, Sam, we've got a statewide initiative now, and it's called RFNC, Recovery Friendly NC. And so that took off. It started here in Wilkes as Recovery Friendly Workplace. And that's because our employers started hiring people, but didn't necessarily know what to do with people that was using substance, right? At our transitional house, of course, they're held accountable, they're tested and all that stuff. But not everybody in the county's from our transitional house that we're getting jobs now. And so, the thing used to be to fire them, right? If someone coming to work and was behaving oddly or smelled like alcohol or whatever that may look like, it was you fired. And so then COVID hit, and employers needed people. And so then it took interest on how do we support these individuals that are struggling. And so that's kind of where Recovery from the Workplace. They're we've got a toolkit for employers. We do a training for employers, and employers a lot of times now, instead of firing people, will send them to us, and that's part of their case plan. And we'll try to meet the need and help people get back on the right track and keep their job. But yeah,
So much of this sounds like, and it is relationship building, and so much of this is giving people proximity to people and to stories that they might not otherwise have. And it sounds like it's dispelling myths and stereotypes. And to your point, saying, a lot of your employees are probably using substances, but the ones we're bringing aren't. Like, consider that. We're actually the ones who are going to be consistent, because there are a lot of myths around this, but that proximity to you and to others and to that experience is dispelling a lot of that. But that's hard. That's work. I mean, that's one-on-one conversations that you've had all these years.
Absolutely. I had to figure out unique ways when one door was slammed to find another one to walk into. And I used to, when I spoke at different conferences and stuff, I would have everybody raise their hand that's been affected by addiction. And I don't do that anymore because everybody in the room is going to raise their hand. You know what I mean? Like that's where we're at. And so, asking these, do you know someone that's been affected by that? Do you wish they would have had the support that I'm trying to give, or the employment, you know what I mean? And most of the time when it's a lot of, it's advocacy, but it's educating. And it's trying to destigmatize who we are. And it's by conversations. Sometimes it's finding another door to go through and having a conversation with somebody different, and then letting that person have a conversation with the person.
Someone in the chat, Jeff, was asking about, what does it look like to engage the religious community there? One, like, is there a religious element within recovery of the work you all do, but also the religious community and how they've engaged Wilkes Recovery and the work over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our faith community is primarily made up of in this county. There's a church on every corner, right? I can't remember. I don't know how many churches are. I think like 200 some churches are in Wilkes County. Primary Baptist, but I mean we have Methodist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Episcopal. It was hard, and it's still sometimes depending upon the congregation, it's still challenging to get, especially harm reduction, right? And in the beginning of harm reduction, that's one of the things we tried to key the faith community, and we'd go into churches on Wednesday night or Sunday morning or whatever that looked like, and try to educate the congregation on harm reduction. We've come a long way with our faith community. Some still are not bought into like harm reduction, but they're bought into everything else we do. And they don't understand it, but it was some tough conversations. But the faith community now, for a lot of our faith community for Christmas will buy gifts. A lot of faith community donates food to our recovery center that people are at all day long and things like that. But it's been a journey. But it was challenging here in Wilkes with our faith community.
Oh, I'm sure, especially with that being such a high portion of the population in the South in North Carolina. Yeah. I saw recently and was looking at, and I'll put it in the chat and email it to people, the 2024 strategic plan. And there's a lot in there that was really great to read. There's two things I want to ask about, at least, that I think people might be interested to hear. One, it talks in there about a peer support specialist. What is that, and why is that such a critical role in this work?
Absolutely. A peer support specialist is first off is someone with lived experience, right? So there is a 50-hour training here in North Carolina that you have to take through that is accredited through the state of North Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill Springboard. But it is a training. The criteria to be able to get to that training is you have to have at least 9 months to a year. You have to have a year before you can take the training, but they say you can start signing up at 9 months, but it's going to take you 3 months to get into the training. But you take a 50-hour training,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to get 20 more hours of continuing education towards that field and other trainings. The majority of the people that work for us are peer support specialists. And it's that lived experience piece that we've been talking about. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
people come in our recovery center and they meet with peer supports daily, and they can connect, the connection piece, because most of the time in we've all got different journeys, but a lot of our journeys are relatable, and people's got different trauma, right? There's people have different trauma than me, but I will be capable of sitting down and connecting with somebody non-judgmental, regardless of their trauma or their history.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who we are. Peer support show unconditional love. We have boundaries, obviously. Uh, our boundaries is not as tense as someone clinical. Like we
Mm-hmm.
can talk about ourselves, we can talk about our journeys, we can share that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just kind of meeting people where they are, right?
Yeah.
Truly meeting people where they are.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that word peer is key. I mean, it's not just that there's someone with lived experience, but they are coming alongside that individual, and there's often a lot of mutual learning. But that seems like a key thing in navigating all of this. As great as these services are, this is a lot to connect, and it sounds like that role really helps walk someone through each piece of this in a non-clinical way, which, as you're saying, has a lot of advantages to be able to just be real and have a different kind of connection.
Absolutely. We are getting ready to, and I'm gonna do my best to make sure everybody's hired with lived experience, but we're stepping into the clinical world with this inpatient treatment center.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also being very intentional to make sure that that inpatient treatment center has peer supports as well.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like you said, you're walking with someone. You're eye to eye. You don't look down on them. You're going together, and making that connection with that peer is and it's because we have lived experience, and so
Mm-hmm.
we're going to connect about something because we use substances, or we've been in jail, or whatever. And it's hard to explain, but there's a trust
Mm.
and open mindedness that comes with that connection that is it's hard to get otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also in the strategic plan, it talks about crisis response services. So what is that? And then what does that look like in Wilkes? Because that might be something new for a lot of people.
And it's fairly new for us. We're in 2024. In 2022, we started looking into this and building relationships. And that is a partnership with your law enforcement, and which is being and still has its challenges. But the beautiful part is I had some connection with law enforcement, because the law enforcement used to chase me, pull me over, take me to jail, all that stuff back in the day are still law enforcement, and they've moved up in power, I guess or ranking, I should say, right? And so we have a chief of police here that I went to high school with.
Mm.
He probably arrested me 12, 15 times in my life. And he's seen me grow and where I'm at, which for him give this value, right? It ain't about me, it's
Mm-hmm.
just about the experience, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started talking to him. I'm like, jail is not the answer for everybody. You know what I mean? I'm like, that's what y'all did to me every time. You threw me in jail. I come out sometimes worse than I was when I went in. And I said, if I'd have had some support through that through that time, who knows what the outcome would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And so our crisis intervention team is peer supports, right? That lived experience. Our law enforcement, when they come up on a call or they get a call and someone is having a mental health crisis or under the influence or nodded out in their car and things like that. So they call us now, and our peer supports 24/7. We've got peer supports after hours, go out to this call with this law enforcement, and if it's safe, what I mean, if they ain't gonna put nobody in danger, obviously. And then we kind of divert that person from probably going to jail.
Mm.
If law enforcement has to put somebody in their car, it's their protocol that they have to search that person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If they don't have to put them in their car, they don't have to search that person.
Mm.
And so ultimately, we are diverting people from going to jail. Obviously, during that time, if it's detox or something like that they want, we can help with that,
Mm-hmm.
either local or out of county. Um, and we go into jail, and we build a relationship. We build a relationship with that person and try to support them after that. But
Mm-hmm.
that has, I would probably say 40% of our law enforcement right now are bought in, which is better than none.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it keeps growing. It does keep growing. We keep getting calls from different law, and once they have that experience with us,
Mm.
because our response time,
Mm-hmm.
we try to keep it within 15 minutes, which is important
Mm.
because most of the time you've got two or three officers standing with one person, and that's taking up three people's time
Mm-hmm.
of law enforcement. And so obviously, if it is within our scope of work, um, we will support that individual. If not, then if it needs a clinical evaluation and things like that, we can call them people in as well or do it on the iPad. Um, but it's just been a beautiful, beautiful relationship to build with law enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
and they're continuing to buy in. So
Mm.
I hope that continues to grow.
Yeah. Crisis response is something that's caught on, and it's in recognition, I feel like, of two things. One, that police as a whole have a limited response that they can bring to situations. That their role is enforcement. And it also is recognizing the importance of experience of those that can bring a lot of other things to the table, that can de-escalate, that can actually work to meet the needs. Those individuals aren't bound by a lot of the regulations and rules around officers. Here in Charlottesville, just this summer, we had also a co-responder model that sounds like y'all's is as well, get going. And the hope is that as well, responding along with the officers, but people with experience to be able to walk through, divert, point people to services that bring a real depth of expertise to what could be a situation that ends with incarceration.
Absolutely. And an add on to that too is this year, January 2024, we embedded our peer supports in our local hospital,
Mm,
which is Wake Forest Baptist at Wilkes. It's a long name, but we have peer supports that are staffed in there 24/7, so around the clock. And so that was important with our response team. Maybe, maybe during the law enforcement call, we might divert someone from being IVC'd, right? Because if they say they're going to kill themselves, then law enforcement has a job. They have protocols. They have to take them to be IVC'd.
mm-hmm,
And not everybody who says they want to kill himself truly wants to kill himself.
mm-hmm,
I mean, we're able to connect, talk with that person, and obviously, if that person needs that, then we'll make sure that they get that IVC. There's a lot of trauma that comes with IVCs too.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
trying to divert people out of our ED and our emergency room too is a big part of that. And
Yeah.
then if they make it to the emergency room, we got peer support staffed in there to make sure they got the support they need.
That hospital piece is big too. That's another place to really engage people.
Absolutely.
I want to start to wrap up our time and point people toward a couple things. One is I'll put all this in the chat and I'll email it to everybody as well. But there's the Facebook page for the EJUSA Evangelical Network. Feel free to follow that. You'll hear about things like this, conversations like this. Also want to make sure that you all go to and look at, there's a lot more on Wilkes Recovery Revolution site that you can learn. There's ways to engage, ask questions, donate, and learn more about what all is going on. And then lastly, I want to point to next month's conversation that we're going to have. So a recent friend of mine named Shirley Mullen has written a book called Claiming the Courageous Middle. And she's talking about what does it look like in a wildly politically polarized time to have it as an act of courage to move in a middle way without compromise while holding to principles that are important. But what does it look like? And I'll put in there the registration link for it. But we're going to talk on November 6th, which was really intentionally after Election Day, because we're assuming, regardless of what happens, it's going to be a divisive time. And people are going to need to think about what does it look like to live in a time where there's a lot of polarization, but to walk through that with grace. That's still under this banner of what does it look like to do this justice work. So we would love to have you at that conversation. And Jeff, you've talked about and modeled so many pieces of that posture. What does unconditional love look like? What does it look like to bring experience? What does it look like to really pursue someone, to create a space of grace with them? All of that, it's the key to the success that I see of all that's happening in Wilkes, because you couldn't force all of this and wouldn't want to. You had to build that community. So we're following that thread into next month. So again, a reminder to everybody, if you're here, you've registered, you'll get a recording of this. I'll send all of these links that I've put in there. Jeff, this is, I don't know, the fourth or fifth time we've talked, at least the second event that we've done together. And not only am I learning something every time that we talk, but like this is moving work. And to hear the spirit and the way that you go about it is one, I recognize how hard that is because it's so relational, but also that's what's doing it. That's what draws people into supporting this work and to recovery as a whole. So end with that phrase again. What did you say that the opposite of addiction? Because I love this.
The opposite of addiction is connection. Connection is community, and then community, you will find recovery.
Great. Jeff, I appreciate your work and you so much. Thanks for coming and sharing all of this with everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sam. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.